Not liking and subscribing to Miniature Dork Universe is a puny plan. You glue-sniffing puppies, like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll spare your puny lives. Otherwise, I won't. Ha ha ha!
Hello, welcome back to Miniature Dork Universe, another round of fun and games. Today we will be painting the 12mm Germans, sort of the counterparts to those Americans that you might have seen the video I did on those already. So we're going to get into painting those up for the Mediterranean theater. And without further ado, let's begin. A good place to start, and where I always start, is to gather some reference material for the units you're going to paint. So here we have an osprey illustration of some Germans in the Italian campaign. And you'll notice they wear surplus Afrika Korps uniform bits. And those, I think, were already in Italy. They were warehoused there, the uniforms and DAK equipment, even the vehicle paints. They were all still available when the Italian campaign began and ended up being used. In addition to that, they were often issued herringbone twill warm weather uniforms, and they were in a color they called reed green, but it was very close to the field gray of just the standard uniform, maybe a bit greener. And like the field gray uniforms, you see a wide variety of options for this color, but it also seemed to fade out to more of a gray color than a green color, like almost like a lighter gray color, which is kind of unusual. So here you see these guys are wearing a combination of any of those colored uniform bits, but also they wore mixed and matched combinations of all of those uniforms. This is from the Dragon German Panzergrenadier 135 scale kit. So here you can see they've got those uniforms, and in addition to that, the one guy on the right, his hat and his pants are made of Italian camouflage material that was confiscated from the Italian army when the Germans took over Italy. So in 1943, just before the Allies invaded, like literally days before, the Germans disarmed the Italian military and took some of their equipment. Probably for Salerno 43, they didn't have that camouflage material yet, but maybe I'm using a little artistic license there. But it certainly did appear later on in the Italian campaign, so it adds an interesting level to painting figures of that era. And here you can also see they're wearing a combination of the leather webbing equipment and some canvas like Afrika Korps issue. This is another osprey illustration, and in this case I think these guys are in Sicily. So the browner color of the Afrika Korps uniform was actually another variation of the Afrika Korps uniform. And you can see that they wear a combo of Afrika Korps boots and then the regular just regular ankle boots that were starting to be issued in 1943. And the one guy's wearing like the sort of Wehrmacht puttees or anklets that they wore to keep their pant legs, and the other guy just has them bloused like the Afrika Korps. So for my figures, they all have the anklets. So I paired the anklets with the Afrika Korps boots. But you could just as easily paint those boots brown, which is the color they came in, or often they would paint them black. And this is another, this one's from a Squadron Signal Panzergrenadier book, and this guy's wearing the camouflaged pants with an Afrika Korps tunic and the faded cap, and he's wearing some kind of mountain boots. And this is saying it's in 1943, which it could be. But again, I'm also thinking like for Sicily or Salerno, they probably didn't have that yet. It would have taken them some time. And here we have a reenactor wearing exactly the kind of kit that we're going to paint. So this reenactor kit might be, you know, replicas. I think they rarely have full array of original
equipment. I think it'd be very expensive and it would probably be in pretty bad shape. But still, it gives you a good idea of what a Panzergrenadier in Italy could look like. And at the time of the Salerno landings, there was 3 Panzergrenadier divisions in the area and 2 Panzer divisions, all of which obviously would have Panzergrenadiers in them. So I kept mine kind of generic so that we could have all of them represented. And here's some more reenactors wearing a variety of the kit, the HBT uniform and Italian camouflage material fashioned into pants. So you can see there's a wide array. And it kind of tells a story too, because by 1943, the German army is starting to feel the effects of being bombed and starting to lose campaigns. And so the availability of material starts to get a little bit crazy. And as the war progresses from that point, you see even more motley sort of mishmash of uniform bits. So you can see early war sort of equipment and uniforms being matched up with later stuff and just kind of a mess. So these guys would have been issued just what was available. So with all that surplus Africa Corps stuff and maybe stuff that they left Europe with, you start to see the picture of what these guys look like. For the first color, I'm going to prime the whole thing with Tamiya. And the reason why I use Tamiya, you're probably sick of hearing this if you watch my videos,
I'm
but
sick of hearing
I use
it.
the Tamiyas because they're formulated for airbrushing and they go on very strong. So the color that I want to use as the base color is going to be similar to Vallejo yellow green. Now the Tamiya yellow green is quite a bit, I would say, more yellowy, and I think this color was more designed for the cockpits of the US fighter planes and things like that. So I'm going to mix in some khaki and hopefully get to something that's close to this, because later on I will be using this. I use these for painting on with a brush, because as good as these are for airbrush, they suck with brush painting, and the Vallejos are great coming off the brush. But I find when I thin Vallejo paint down with their thinners and spray it on, the paint comes off pretty easy. It doesn't seem to be very tough. I've shut off the sound so that you don't have to hear my bloody paint compressor. The figures have been glued to excess Flames of War bases that I had lying around, and then I used evergreen plastic to make the placard for the labels that I'm going to put on. And on the sides are half round pieces that I use just to help handle them easier. That beveled base makes it kind of difficult to get a handhold on it, and those little half round bits just make it so that you can dig your fingertips under there enough. And that way it keeps your hands off of the figures because they are quite delicate. So I go through all of them and just put on a nice smooth coat of the color that I mixed up, the Tamiya color. Let that dry for a while and then get on with the brush painting. Our first Vallejo color is going to be the German uniform color, and I've mixed it so well you can barely see it in this photo here. And this will allow us to do any of the highlights or any touch-ups we might need to do if the uniforms get bunged up as we go. Here I've mixed 1 drop of Vallejo yellow green to 1 drop of stone gray. There is a bit of an error here. There's 2 Vallejo yellow greens and I grabbed the wrong swatch. The yellow green that you should use is in fact 70.881, not 70.954. So sorry about that one. The field gray uniform, or what I'm calling field gray uniform, but it could also include the HBT uniform, the reed green, which would fade to a very similar color, especially when you're looking at a 12mm figure. I don't think it matters. So for sake of ease, we'll just call it a field gray uniform. For that color, I used green gray. I'm not really a salesman for Vallejo. I'm just putting this here in case you're not familiar with the paints and you see what to get when you go to the hobby store. However, I will say I really do like Vallejo paints. I have some of them that I bought in 2005 and I'm still using the bottle. And in fact, I haven't even finished a bottle yet. I'm almost finished my black gray, but you know, they seem to last for a long time. So they're pretty good and they paint really well off the brush. As I mentioned before, there was a lot of the Africa Core paints in surplus and they were certainly used. In total, there were 4 different colors, 2 early authorized colors from about 1941 to 42, and then after that there were 2 later authorized colors, and they were all used. So to keep it simpler, I just used 1 color for things that might have gotten painted, and also the helmets could be camouflaged. The 1943, you know, red, brown, and dark green paints were also available, but I tried to keep it simple or I'd be painting forever. To depict the later Africa brown color, I used green ochre and painted some of the helmets and ammunition tins and things like that with that color. But you could also use the sort of dark slate or dark green colors that they used for standard equipment. And you could also add camouflage patterns. I saw this, but you know, it depends how long you want to be painting. And then there's the equipment that was just left in the original sort of colors that they would have been painted for that time. And again, that can be a variety of colors, like a dark slate or a field gray or a dark German green. So in my case, I just picked sort of 1 color that was kind of in the middle of all of them. And that would be olive gray. I find that makes a nice color, especially in this scale. The next color will be for the tropical webbing and faded field caps that were common with the Africa Core. And for that, I used dark sand. You could also do the caps in the standard uniform color. I did do a couple like that. But the faded caps were what made you look really cool, and so they were highly coveted. The Italian camouflage fabric was kind of a signature of the Italian campaign, so that's kind of cool. It kind of really places the figures in that time and place. Also though, there were some SS units that used that fabric as well. The first Leibstandarte was in northern Italy for a period of time when they were disarming the Italian military. So they took a bunch of that material, and then some of that material ended up in the 12th SS Hitlerjugend. So in places like Normandy, you can actually see some of this Italian camouflage fabric showing in addition to all the various camouflage patterns that the Waffen-SS was using. For the base, I used olive gray for that as well. And you can see some of the metal parts like the gas mask canister and the mess tin. Those were all metal parts, so they were either painted olive gray or the green ochre. For the reddish brown, which is the next most dominant color, I use saddle brown and just put that on in sort of stripy patterns across the olive gray. For the least dominant color, I use middle stone, and there's just little dots of that in and around the brown. And that shouldn't be, yeah, keep it pretty small. Something I forgot to do is show the highlight colors I use for this, so I apologize for that, so I'll just go over it quickly now. So for the olive gray, I mixed in light gray when I was doing the highlights. Over saddle brown, I used red leather, just hitting the very high points. And then for middle stone, I just used middle stone, so it's going to get a wash, and then after the wash, I put a little dot of middle stone here and there just to brighten it up a bit. So sorry I forgot that, but you know, just make it a bit lighter. Now we're on to the German camouflage fabric, and the Wehrmacht and the Waffen-SS each had their own camouflage fabrics. So this would be the Wehrmacht camouflage, the splinter camouflage, and that of course came in a variety of colors. So for the love of God, there's so many bloody colors for the Germans. It's not my fault, don't blame me. You can probably simplify it with guys these small, but me being OCD, I did them all. So let's look at these colors. For the base color in this scale, I use stone gray. You want it to be a little bit lighter, and I think that looks pretty good. The next most dominant color, I used German camouflage medium brown, and you want to paint these in sort of geometric, straight lined, sort of triangular, diamond, sharp sort of shapes. Again, I would look at a reference before attempting splinter camouflage, but yeah, if you stay with straight lines and jagged and pointy, you're doing good. So in this scale, you want to go a bit lighter for everything. So for the green, I went with medium olive. Yeah, the scale effect means you want to go significantly lighter than you would do even in 15mm scale. And this color was the least dominant, and it usually links the brown to the base gray color, the sort of stone gray color. So be very sparing with that. Once again, in true wank fashion, I forgot to show you the highlights later on for the German camouflage color. And they're pretty easy. For the stone gray, I just went in with the stone gray again and just sort of highlighted top areas, or I used it to even make the brown even more jagged and triangular if it looked kind of fuzzy. And then for the German camouflage medium brown, I highlighted areas of that with English uniform. And for the medium olive, I just used the straight up medium olive again. Just anywhere where the wash made it sort of disappear, I just brightened it up with a little dab of the original color. Before I get into the color I painted the canvas equipment, I'll just point out this one guy with the cap, second from the right, has the camouflaged Zeitbahn attached to his equipment, so I used the German camouflage colors for that as well. However, it's so small you could probably just get away with using the canvas color here, which is going to be German camouflage beige World War II. So that's going to be the bread bags, the MP40 cases, and if you want to kind of cheat on the Zeitbahn that some of the figures have, you can use this color. Then we have the brown leather equipment, which would include the bottom parts of the Africa Corps issue boots that I decided to paint in, and the straps for the rifles. For that, I'm going to use mahogany brown, or any sort of reddish brown would do. But I already used like saddle brown, so I thought I would introduce a different color. Although, upon reflection, that might have been stupid, you know, adding all these colors. But, you know, you could definitely simplify this. If you're doing a big war game and you need to paint a bunch of these guys fast, I would just bail on all of the camouflage equipment and just do like the straight up colors, and you could get away with it. I just wanted a bit of variation, and to be honest, I could have gone with even more variation. I mean, these guys were painting camouflage patterns on their fucking helmets, for God's sake. So, you know, even I'm not in a hurry to get them done, but I wanted to get them done. But I mean, yeah, it's like endless. These guys are getting so motley and mishmash by this point that you can do a whole lot of variation. Then I got into the stuff that was blued steel, black metal, and leather! Sounds like my Sundays when I jam with my band. For that, I used black gray, and I love that color. I don't go with straight up black because they're so small, it might look a bit too black. I think this is a good compromise. Then we get to the rifle stocks and wooden equipment like the spade handles and grenade handles on the sort of stick grenades that they're using. And for that, I'll use beige brown. That's my sort of standard go-to color for rifle stocks and wooden stuff. And it seems to work pretty good. And some of these guys had ammunition hanging around their neck. And for that I used Vallejo metal color, which is intended for airbrushes, but it comes off the brush fairly nicely. And it's a million times better than when you just get the normal paints like we've been using all along. Their metallics are kind of gooey, and the pigment particles are the size of freaking glitter, and I just find it generally sucks. So these metal colors really paint on a lot smoother. So for German mortar ammunition, they used a unusual kind of reddish brown color, and the Granatwerfer 34 was no exception. For that, I find red leather to be a great match for the color that they used for their mortar ammunition. The final base color is going to be the flesh, and I save that for last. Some people do it first, I do it last. I guess it doesn't matter, it's up to you, your preference. For that, I mix sunny skin tone with medium flesh tone to give me kind of like something that I like in the middle. I'll take a moment to talk about how I painted the Schwimmwagen that I'm using for one of my combat patrol markers. I'm just going to keep this one brief and not in depth like the soldiers, or else this will take forever. But I just sprayed on a base coat of Tamiya dark yellow, and it's a pretty yellowy tan, I would say. And to me, in my research, it looks pretty close for the 1943 like first variation of the dark yellow. And then I highlight it with my sort of 1944 variation of the color, which is a mix. This is a 3-part mix, all 1 part to 1 part to 1 part. It's dark yellow, Tamiya dark yellow, Tamiya deck tan, and Tamiya flesh. So for a big bottle like this, I just take a whole bottle of each of those previously mentioned colors and just mix it in one. And I find that makes a great color for the later dark yellow. I'm using it here as a bit of a highlight that I'm spraying on. Not so much a modulation, I just sort of sprayed it on. And then I did the wheels dark gray. I did the spare wheel black gray just because it's not on the ground, so it's a bit darker. Yeah, you could do them all the same color, And the seat covers were leather, so I painted those with the black gray. I sort of painted in the steering wheel. I don't know if you can see it or if this is in focus. I painted in the steering wheel with some black gray, just roughly. The jerry can in the back seat, I just painted it with German field gray. Let's see if we can get that in focus. I can't even tell. The windshield, I used Luftwaffe uniform and just lightened it with a bit of white for now. I made the canvas tilt just out of green stuff and painted that. I think I used dark sand. The exhaust, I'm going to paint them rusty, so I painted that in with mahogany brown, and I'll just use dry brush different sort of orangey browns. The oar and the shovel, the wooden part of the shovel, I just used a good old basic beige brown. The shovel I used dark gray. And for the camouflage colors, I sort of watered down the paints and kind of made it look like they were sprayed on with sort of watered down paint. It's so small though, I don't know if you need to be too careful about that kind of sprayed on look, to be honest, and it's going to get washes and things like that. So for the camouflage color, I used reflective green for the dark green, and I used just straight up flat brown for the brown, but it was watered down quite a bit, and I built it up with some layers, and you probably can't see it, but I try to make it look like I put it on light, and then I put on little, as it dries, I add little blotches on top. I also put acrylic retardant in the paint, so it's kind of workable. You can kind of wet it and give it like a slight sort of faded out look with darker spots in the middle. What I'm trying to make it look like is someone's got a compressor, and they're, it's not always easy to spray on a consistent line with a bigger compressor, or even a smaller one for that matter. So it kind of has a patchy, blotchy look even within the straight lines. And that's sort of what I try to achieve. But anyway, those were the base colors for the Schwimmwagen, and I'm just going to do like your basic wash and some dry brushing and a little bit of highlighting, and just jam in a driver and use this as one of my combat patrols. Having put on all of your basic colors, I then come in with this Citadel shade, Agrax Earth shade, and I put that on straight up. And the reason why I do is because when you mix it with water, it sometimes gets this kind of white frosted shit, which I don't like, and I bet you don't like it either. So we're going to lighten it up quite a bit with highlights anyway, so I would just go straight up. I don't know what the magic, some people say you can put a little bit of water in, but I always get that white frosted shit. Maybe you have to wait until the moon is waning and sacrifice an alpaca to Satan while facing south, and it fucking works, but most of the time it just makes that cloudy shit. So if you get it, that cloudy shit, you can make it disappear with a bit of like gloss varnish, or you can even hit it with a bit more of this. Just the area that's cloudy though, you don't want to go too dark, so just get a small brush and touch that cloudy spot with a bit more of the earth shade. Otherwise though, it covers really well and it shades in really well. So that was the next step. Now we're ready to put all the highlights on after the wash. So initially, with all of these highlights that are coming up, I'm going to show you my highlight colors, but keep in mind, initially I put down the base color again, just on the high areas. So it sort of starts the highlight, and it will be lighter because it's been washed. And then I'll move into the actual highlight color, which I'm about to show here. In this case, the Afrika Korps uniforms we're going to highlight by adding in a bit of stone gray. And I'm showing these colors, the highlight colors, because I don't just mix in white for the majority of them. I think the only one I did is the green-gray color, just to give them a bit more vibrance. You could just add white, but I think it ends up overall looking washed out. And that might not be a bad thing for someone in a dry, arid sort of environment. But nevertheless, here's how I did it. I mean, you can choose to highlight it whichever way you want, but if you like the way these turned out, this is what I did. Next is the field gray or HBT uniform highlights. So once again, I just started in by touching up the high points with the green-gray paint. This is a case where I actually blended it in with some white. Just a bit of white is necessary, and I'm just keeping it a bit more on the grayish side. Just because those HBT uniforms did seem to go quite gray, as did the field gray when they faded out. Then I went around to the parts that were painted in the Africa brown. I touched it up with a little bit of the straight up green ochre. Then to that I mixed in a bit of dark sand for the more bright highlights. I didn't put exact mixture amounts here because it's kind of subjective. Just make it as light as you feel it should be to achieve the effect you want. That being said, I felt like my Americans were too contrasty because when I was done the colors, I didn't just use the straight up color first to start the highlights, and then I went in with the lightened color, and it seemed to be way contrasty. These, on the other hand, I feel like I could have made them a little bit more contrasty. So in this case, I did use the base color to start the highlights and then lighten them up. And I kind of wish that the lighter color I'd made just a touch lighter. But again, it's subjective, and it's something you kind of got to get a feel for and paint around. And this is a reason why I don't do a huge army all at once, because you can critique as you go along and perfect it as you go. And so there might be a slight difference between your first group that you painted and the later groups. They might get a little better, but they sort of all blend in at the end anyway. And then you sort of achieve your perfect version. For the dark sand portions, I just went in with the original dark sand. It's such a light color, I didn't really want to lighten it any further. And with the wash over top of the previous dark sand layer, this made a very nice highlight. So I just left it at that. For the blue, steel, black metal, and leather highlights, for the black leather Y harness on their webbing, I used the black gray and I mixed in some London gray. With my Americans, I used straight up London gray, but I thought it was a bit too bright for the black, a bit too contrasty. Also, I did not put any of the brown wash on the black, especially for the guns. Here we go with the leather parts of the boots and the rifle slings, and for that I always just mix in an orange brown with whatever color I use for the leather, and I find that orange brown just gives it a nice shine. Again, I'm always highlighting first with the original color, so in this case it was beige brown, and then for the high highlight I added in some tan yellow. I forgot to mention earlier the stocks on the MG42. So the MG42 and MG43 had Bakelite stocks. So that's basically ground up wood like sawdust in resin. And they tended to be either a very dark brown or black. So I went with the darker brown color for the color variation, and I went with German camouflage black brown. And I highlighted it with chocolate brown. So in the picture here it indicates that I mixed them, but I did not. I painted the base color with German camouflage black brown, and then I went in and just gave it a little highlight of the chocolate brown. And the chocolate brown is actually lighter. It doesn't look like that on the swatch, but in reality it is. We made the flesh tones look a bit more lively with some highlights. So I went in with the original sunny flesh tone or skin tone and added the medium flesh tone, just the regular mix on all the high points. And then to get the high points, like the high cheekbones, the tip of the nose, fingertips and such, I mixed in some of the basic skin tone, which is quite light. For the ammunition on the Granatwerfer 34, I used the original red leather on the high points, and then I added in a bit of flat yellow and just a few little dots of that for the extreme highlights. And then any areas where the extra dark sort of shadows didn't show up, I just used the German camouflage black brown to bring them back. So, you know, around the anklets and the division between the shirt and the pants, anywhere where it just seemed kind of washed out, I just darkened it up with this color. Now the figures are all basically painted, and I will go on to my groundwork. So I'm not going to go into detail about this here. If you want to see how I did the colors for this, you can check out my my basing of the Americans for the same Italian campaign. I did do the exact same groundwork, or I have a whole video on how I make my groundwork. If you're not making, you know, an Italy campaign, but you like the way this stuff is looking, I'll put a link in my description below for that video on making groundwork. And I'll also put the link on how I painted my Americans so you can see the actual colors I use. But for the sake of not being super repetitive, I'm not going to go on and on about the same things in every video. And yeah, so just get your tool of choice and start putting your groundwork down. Actually, what I'm going to do for the groundwork is I'll put in a link to that video just to the part where I'm painting the groundwork. In case you're not interested in painting US for the Mediterranean, maybe you're doing the British or something, so it's not really relevant to you. I'll just put that American video at the point where the groundwork starts, so you can just you know, keep watching this if you're thinking of just doing some Germans. So with all the groundwork done and dry, I'm going to finish out the painting. I'm going to paint some of the rocks and whatever. Again, I'll leave the link to how I did the Americans. I'm doing these pretty much the same way. The only difference I have here is that I've added some smaller rocks, and yeah, and I've made my bases pretty rocky. Some people don't like putting larger rocks on because for some reason they think they're out of scale. But if you see this picture over here, you'll note that rocks can be quite large, but I think we all kind of know that anyway, right? There's not just one size of rock. They're pretty freaking big in certain circumstances. So in my mind, well, and this is a picture from Italy that just came up, so you know, it's a rocky terrain. It's mountainous and rocky. So we've put the rocks on. Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to paint up the rocks, do a bit of dry brushing, put on some foliage and stuff, some static grass, and then put on my labels on the back, and that will complete it out. So we'll come back when I have all that done. Right then, there we have it. They're all painted up, they're all based. Like I said before, if you want to see how I did the colors, or what colors I used and some of the basing materials, I have a link to my Americans that I based, the 12 millimeter, also for Italy. So it's the same groundwork. And you know, I show you putting the labels on and all of that kind of thing. So these are based for O group. I didn't use the O group basing, I used more historical basing. So this is a Panzergrenadier company, not an armored one, just a motorized, like truck, lorry mounted infantry. So how they differ from the rules have battalion mortars, but the historical organization of the Panzergrenadiers, they had a heavy platoon within the company, which had a section of mortars and a section of machine guns. So they're represented by these two guys over here. And I haven't actually played the game yet, so it might shoot me in the foot, but I think I'm just going to deploy my company mortars the way they're saying to play your battalion mortars, basically. They'll be considered sort of off table, and I'll keep them by the company commander just to remind me that they're there, and they can fire up to one shot per turn. I'll have to look at those rules a little closer, but I'll have a way to fudge it. I usually do. So yeah, I'm happy how they turned out and how the basing turned out. Usually when I look at these things when they're done, I sort of critique and see where to improve. And what I thought with my Americans is that they might have been a little bit too contrasty. Doesn't really matter because they're so bloody tiny. However, with these, I think they're not quite contrasty enough. So I haven't really found that balance. So the next company I paint, hopefully I'll get that spot, you know, that I'm happy with. I mean, it's not that I'm not happy with these, but each time I complete something, I always look at it and see, you know, what would I do to make it even better. I mean, I think these look quite good. I'm pretty happy with them. They'll look good on the table, and the labels make them very obvious what each group is. For the labels, I use the Italian camouflage pattern because they captured a lot of that Italian material and used it for themselves. It probably wasn't the most common in late 1943 for the Salerno landings, but I took a little artistic license there. So I hope you enjoyed this video and that it helped you out, even if you're not really doing Mediterranean theater stuff, or you know, if you're not even doing 12 millimeter stuff, you can still apply this basing to larger scales, you know, up to even 28 millimeter. It'll still look nice. So thanks for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you again for another round of Miniature Dork Universe when it is ready to go. Bye for now.